Okay, part 3 of Kimei Tzeitcha. We are holding chapter. Is it part 3 or part 4? We're at part 4. I think I tagged it wrong. You'll fix it? You'll correct the tagging? Okay, I think we're actually at part 4. Okay, so.
It's part 4, guys.
Thank you very much. Okay, part 4, we're at chapter 4 on page Reish Zayin in our handouts. And we've been talking about leaving Egypt. Specifically, the idea that we need to leave every single day. We need to recall the exodus of Egypt, meaning that we need to leave, break free of the grip of the animal soul, of the evil inclination, and of the material world that prevents us from serving God. So that is the exodus of Egypt that we're required to experience every single day. Then we said, besides for that, there's another type of exodus of Egypt, because there's another aspect of Egypt, which is the idea of constraints in general, not just something that prevents us from serving God, as was the case with the literal Egypt, where the Egyptians kept the Jews from serving God, and therefore God says to Moses, go to Pharaoh and tell him to let them go so they can serve me. So that was physical barriers that were preventing us from serving Hashem. And there's also the great concealment of godliness, but there's also a spiritual Egypt. And we started to explain in chapter 3 that the word olam, that creation in general is a form of Egypt. And the word that we use that's synonymous really with creation, olam, world, it has three meanings. One is that it represents sort of space, time and space. A world is defined by time and space, and that's a limitation. You're limited in time, you're limited in space. But then olam also means helen, concealment. And not only does it mean, and a third thing is that it comes from the same root as the word elam, which means youth, which represents strength and enthusiasm and force. So. And we connected all three. We said that the world represents a constraint, a limitation, a limit of divine energy, of godly energy in the world. So there's infinite God, but there's a finite amount of godliness. And beyond that, there's also concealment of godliness. So not only does the world limit the godly flow and energy, but it also conceals it. So it's Helim, which is a Hester. So it's not just that it's essentially concealed, but that it's actually blocked. There's sort of like a curtain that covers over the optical illusion that is reality, obstructs and conceals the godliness that's behind it. And this concealment is an intense concealment. Similar to Egypt being an intense exile, right? We talked about the idea of Egypt being an emotional and a material and a physical, spiritual exile, one that really oppressed us on all levels, and all levels of the psyche. So similarly, the world in general, the concealment is such that's an intense concealment, like Elam, like youth, that's intense. Now, chapter 4. And the previous chapter continues in his mimer, on which this one is based, from 1948. Creation, what is the source of creation? If we go back to, we've talked about Seder Hishtalshlus, the chain of reality, of the evolutionary chain through which godliness becomes, or spirituality becomes physicality. And so there's a certain series of concealments that lead to it. So the beginning of it, the beginning of creation, is the light of the Kav. What does this mean? So we talked about this actually a little bit in the Basi Lagani that we learned earlier, and we talked a little bit on Tuesday. So for an infinite God that essentially exists, to create everything okay back there? Yeah, to create a world that has a feeling of its own autonomous existence. How is that possible? How does God create? If God fills every space, and God is infinite and is the ultimate existence, then how is it possible for anything else to exist in that place, in that space? It's not possible. So what God has to do, the first step to creating a world is He has to create space for a world. He has to make a space for it. And so we discussed the idea. I'm sorry. By removing himself. Now, again, this mimer is not discussing the nature of that removal, whether it's literal, not literal, that we touched on more in Basi Lagani, and that's irrelevant to this conversation. The point is very simply, God has to create a space. So he has to vacate a space, so to speak, or put or conceal his infiniteness, and in that space, then there could be a world. So how does that work? But ultimately, creation is only exists because God animates and brings it into existence. Since creation, existence's true nature is non-existence, so God has to constantly sustain it. So the fact that anything exists means that God is constantly willing it into existence, changing it from its natural state of non-existence. We discussed in the past the metaphor of throwing a stone. We've explored this topic. The point here that's necessary here is what happens. So God creates an empty space, and then into that space he shines sort of his light into it. Now, since the issue initially was that you have an infinite God, and so there's no room, there's no space for anything finite, so the solution was to create an empty space, but then how do you fill that space? So God has to fill that space. But if he's filling it, then we're back to the original problem, which is that he's infinite. So it fills up the space again. So we're back to square one. So the point is that when he re-enters that void, it's done in a way that's limited. So the mere fact that he can remove himself from a space reveals God's ability for finite, right? Because to limit God to infinity is to limit him and to define him, and God's not definable and not limited, so he's not limited to infinity. So he could create that space, and then he can animate that empty space or bring into reality something finite by shining into it a sort of a limited light. Now this light itself is infinite, but it's referred to as sort of like, really the example is given in Chassidus, like in modern terminology, you'd compare it to like a laser beam, which is a very concentrated, very narrow, very focused beam of energy. And so that's what it was. So on one hand, first it was all infinite, it was everywhere. Now it's focused and it's narrow. It's already got dimensions. It's already got parameters. It also already has a beginning and end, a top and a bottom. In addition, what happens after that is this light then sort of shines through concealments. This is the idea of it's not necessary for us to get into the details of that, but the point is that the light is then veiled and concealed, and the further it shines, the more dim it becomes as a result of the. So it's not that it's a dim light, but it's just covered by more concealment, which serve to dim that light. So it's an infinite light that can shine to infinity, but because it's constantly being veiled and concealed, so it gets dimmer and dimmer until we get to our world in which it's completely dim, where we don't see that energy at all. That light is called the kav, because kav means a line. And so if we were to give it a visual to this type of thing, it would be a line, and so it's referred to as the kav. So the kav is the source of all of reality, right? Once God creates that space, the source of reality, what animates reality, that's what's called the kav. So creation comes from the light of the kav. And then the Rebbe continues here, because from the light that came before the tzimtzum, before this removal, where God removes himself from that space, that light cannot create worlds, as they are constituted today as finite, seemingly independent entities. Why? Because worlds, the meaning of worlds is that they have a sort of defined category, and then you have higher and lower worlds. That's why you have so many worlds. Each one is on its own level, its own category. And so when we're talking about a world, and as we mentioned, the first definition of world, which is time and space, so there's higher and there's lower, there's top and there's bottom. This is, as we explained, that the category, the definition of world is space. The inyan hamakim beruchni simaylamata. What is the spiritual parameters? Spiritual parameters of space are higher and lower. Meaning that this week we have pancakes for you. You see that? Is that good or bad? Oh, that's why he has. That's why he's okay. Good. What does that mean? In our world, in our reality, everything is, there's a physical space. In spiritual worlds, there's no physical, in the spiritual realm, there's no physical space, so there's spiritual space. What is spiritual space? So higher and lower, the concept of higher and lower is its space. There's higher and there's lower. That's a spiritual kind of a space. Now, what does it mean that it's a spiritual space, not a physical space? Because here, you have the floor is lower and the ceiling is higher. What does that mean? So, in context to God, whenever we talk about higher and lower, what we mean, because if God is everywhere, so it's not like the further, if you're on the second story, you're closer to God. What it means is, bless you, what it means is more sensitive to godliness and less sensitive to godliness. So, in all these different worlds, the higher you go, the more sensitive, the more in tune they are with their source. The closer they are. So the fact that you can say that a world is either more sensitive to God or less sensitive to God, which in other words is higher or lower, that's its form of space. Those are its dimensions. So that is, if it's a world, then it already is defined by that space, albeit even a spiritual space. But the light that's before the tzimtzum, the light that is beyond the tzimtzum before it, doesn't have any higher or lower. It's not that there's something that's closer or further. There's no space there. There's no higher or lower. So that's number one. So therefore, the light that's before the tzimtzum can't be a source for worlds, because if we're talking about worlds where there's higher and lower, there's space. Non-space can't produce space. A world where the divine light that is not higher or lower can't produce something that's higher or lower. It itself is not a source for it. You need something, and that's why the kav, which is there's no base, then the kav, which has a higher and a lower. If it's a kav, it means there's a beginning to it and an end to it. That's already defined as space. So that could right. The gam, another reason why the light before the tzimtzum can't serve as a source for the worlds, for creation, is ki klolos ha'oir shel fnei tzimtzum ha'oir ha'kol b'atzmosei. We're going to get a little bit deeper here, which is that the light that's before the tzimtzum is referred to as light that is within its source, within the essence. And light that is included within its source, is completely nullified to the extent that it's not even called, you can't even call it light. Therefore it can't be a source, serve as a source for the worlds. Because in order to be a source for something, you yourself have to be defined. If you're a source for something, then you have to be defined, even as a source. What does this mean? Very simply, Alter Rebbe talks about it in Tanya, in Sharichud V'Amunah, and not to get too carried away. Light, is you have, let's say, the example he brings there is of the sun. So the sun, we live in this world, we have benefit from the light of the sun. We have the rays of the sun that really that make room for life, that enable life on this planet. If now the rays of the sunlight emanates from where? From the sun. How do we know it emanates from the sun? Because you see the sun, and the light therefore is coming from the sun. If there's light coming from the sun, then you must then conclude as well that this light also exists within the sun. Right? That makes sense?
No, like the moon is a reflection of the sun.
Okay, so you're still tracing it back to the sun. The light that the moon reflects from the sun has to be traced back into the sun.
So you can say the sun is also the reflection from something else.
Okay, ultimately you have to get back to a primary source of light. Yeah. So it's the sun. So the sun is a source of light. The source of light in this world. But if you were to travel to the sun and go into the sun, would you see the light of the sun? You wouldn't see the light of the sun. You would see the sun. Or in other words, let me put it in different terms.
Yeah, if you could go to the sun, you'd see what.
Don't make a mess, please. But not just that. The source of light is not light. It's a source of light. Right? So the light that comes out of the source is light. But if it's light, then it's not in its source. So to say the light as it's found in its source, you can't call it light. Because what is it? Its source. It's a luminary. It's not a light. Does that make sense? So in the
thing was making the light is not really light.
So light in its source you can't call it light.
It's not light.
Because if you can call it light, then it's not in its source. If it's in its source, then it's a source. It's not light. So that's the issue we run into. So the light. I'm sorry.
The light itself is not really light. It makes light.
It's not light. It's the source of light. Yeah.
The essence is not light.
Yeah.
It's choosing things to make light.
Right. So when we talk about the light, so why we call it the light before the tzimtzum? Okay, that's a good question. That's another topic. That's not the point here. But still, what we call oir lifnei tzimtzum, the light before the contraction, before that before God creates that empty space, that light is in its source. What's revealed before creation is only God in His essence. So the light that exists within its essence. So you can't even call it light. So since you can't call it light, it can't be a source of. It can't be the source of light. It's totally removed from. It is what it is, and it's removed from anything that follows. Okay. So therefore, the light that's before the tzimtzum can't be a source for the world. So what could be the source of the world? The Eir HaKav, the light of the Kav, of this laser beam that we're referring to. The Gam Kiklolus. I'm sorry, we read that already. Okay, the Daf Gal Yidei Eir HaKav, and it's only through the light of the Kav, Dal Yidei Shenimshach Yidei Tzimtzum, which, as a result of it coming down through the Tzimtzum, thanks to the Tzimtzum, to this contraction, it now creates, it becomes a light. It's no longer a luminary. It's now disconnected, so to speak, from its source, and now becomes a light. V'yesh b'maylo mata, and therefore has higher and lower. It's only through it that the worlds can then be created. Can then be brought into existence. So what emerges now is that the Kav is similar to what we said about the world. The world is time and space and concealment. Yeah, we gave three meanings of the word. The third one, which is youth, only represents the intensity. It's not another function of the world. It just shows on the nature of what it already is, the nature of its function, which is that it's intense. But the other two definitions we gave for the world, which is A, that it's a limitation, and B, that it's a concealment, we can apply those two concepts to the Kav as well. Where are we? I lost the place. Via Shleimar. So we can say the Shnei Inyanim Elu Sheba HaKav. These two things in the Kav. Number one, that it has a higher and a lower, and number two, that it is a light, and therefore, because of these two things, it serves as a source for the worlds. So these two things, are similar to the two functions or the two definitions that we gave for the world, for worlds in general. When we say higher and lower in the Kav, that is similar to the limitation of the world, the boundaries of world. And the fact that we say that the Kav is a light, it's no longer in the source of light. It's now independent, so to speak. But obviously light, one of the reasons we use light is because light isn't independent, it's not cut off from its source. But still, it's outside of its source now, it's separate from its source. See, the Rebbe also adds in parentheses, it's batel, light by its nature is totally submitted to its source. That's why if you turn off a light, it instantly goes off. It doesn't sort of turn off slowly, it doesn't gradually go out, it instantly goes out because it's totally connected to its source. But still, it has an appearance of its own separate thing. Sometimes if the sun is shining the right way, maybe you would know this into colors and that imagery, you could see sort of the rays of light. So I'm not looking at the sun, but I could see the ray of light. So I can see something. I see light, so that I'm not seeing the source. So you could say it's nullified to its source, that where the source to stop shining would instantly disappear. It's totally connected to it, totally tapped into it, but it still gives its own appearance. So that's what it means. It's not so batel to its source. It's not totally nullified to its source. It does have that its own mitzius, its own existence. So that's who dugmas ha'helam v'hester da'elam. This is similar to the concealment function of worlds, which is sibas hayeshus shabai, which is the reason for why it feels. So why does something feel independent? Because it has how does something give off the appearance of its own existence? Because it feels itself. It feels independent. So that's its own ego. It feels its own existence. That's what. So just as the world feels its own self and therefore conceals the light, so the same thing is with regard to the Kav. That the fact that the Kav is a mitzius, or we call it an existence of light. It has its sort of independence. So therefore, that represents it by its very definition. It then conceals its source, which is the light that precedes the tzimtzum. Okay. So based on what we just said, so based on what we said, that the worlds are called Mitzrayim, they're called Egypt based on these two functions, the fact that they're Meitzer, a limit, so they're finite, and because they're a concealment, we must then conclude that the source of all reality is also considered Mitzrayim, that even the Kav. So remember, we started talking in the Maimer about the fact that we have to go out of higher Egypts, spiritual Egypts. So the Rebbe is taking us straight to the top. If we go to the source of creation, you're going to find that also to be Mitzrayim. Because if we're defining Mitzrayim as finite, limit, and as concealment, well, that already exists at the first stage of creation. So we can say that Mitzrayim, we can apply this concept of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, even to the highest source, to the Oir HaKav. And so Yeshlemar, therefore we could say Shagam Hakav Nichol B'Chiz Mitzrayim, B'Amitis Inyan This Mitzrayim, and therefore the true leaving of Egypt, leaving it on all levels, Hayitziyah Mikola Mitzarim Agbal, is leaving all levels and all boundaries. Hu Al Yidei Hagiloi Da'atzmas Ayin Seish B'nei Tzimtzum. What does it mean to leave Egypt then? The only way to fully leave Egypt completely, that there's no more concept, is to reveal God's essence, which is not limited and is not concealed. Anything that's not God's essence is both a limitation and also a concealment. The fact that it's definable makes it a definition, because as we said, definition is a limit. So anything, even the highest levels of godliness, the highest levels of divine light, are all a Mitzrayim. So what is the release of Egypt? What is a release from all of those things? Revealing God's essence. This is why, when Mashiach is going to come, the future redemption, that'll be the completion of leaving Egypt, which is Hayitziyah Mikola Mitzvah Agbal, is leaving all the limits and boundaries, because then we will have revealed, then what will be revealed is the light that's before the Tzimtzum, from before creation. And when we talk about the light before the Tzimtzum, and here the Rebbe doesn't elaborate, because what we apply to the Kav, in a sense, in Chassidus it's talked about actually at length, that you can really start climbing higher and higher even before the Tzimtzum. Because as we said, for something to be a source, it needs to be a connection. So once we start applying these terms relatively, relative to each level, suddenly it could become a source. So we can already start to apply it. So I'm saying that when Mashiach comes, what's going to be revealed? The light before the Tzimtzum, which is higher than the light that is connected to Elomis, and even really beyond that, the revelation of God's essence. So when God's essence is revealed, that is the ultimate exodus of Egypt, freeing of Egypt, when we've completely shed every single type of boundary and barrier. How are we doing on time?
9 o'clock.
It's 9 o'clock? Okay. Does this make sense so far?
No.
Doesn't make sense. Okay.
Maybe because I'm busy on the phone.
Okay. So I can't help you with that. I can't remedy that problem.
Usually I can understand it.
Okay. So we've said like this. We started by saying that there are two levels of the exodus of Egypt. There's the physical exodus of Egypt, and then there's the spiritual exodus of Egypt. And we said the physical exodus of Egypt, that one we can all relate to. Anything that prevents us from serving God, breaking free of that is an exodus from Egypt. Why are we prevented from serving God? Either because we don't feel capable, we don't feel up to it, we don't think that we're able to do it, or because we're concealed, please. Or because there's a concealment, we don't see God, we question, we have doubts, we have concerns, we're not sure, we don't know. Those are concealments. Those are two aspects of Egypt, the two defining aspects of Egypt. So those things we have to break free of. Thanks. Those things we have to break free of. That's number one. But then there's the spiritual Egypt. So here we finish defining what is the spiritual Egypt that we have to leave. So we said, since we're saying Egypt, we're defining Egypt and the exodus of Egypt as the breaking free of all barriers of definition and concealment. So even in the spiritual realities, even in heaven, even in the higher worlds, even in the higher spiritual worlds that are connected to God, even in the domain of the angels, etc., in all these celestial bodies, even there we can apply the concept of Egypt, because even they are both a limitation and a concealment of God. That's what we explained. That's what we've been explaining.
It has its own definition.
The light by itself is by itself. They're two separate things.
Yeah.
And so therefore that's also in Egypt. And so that now we can understand why when Mashiach comes we will have completely left all of these Egypts behind. Because when Mashiach comes, what will be revealed and what God's essence will be revealed. God's essence is not definable and is not concealable. And so once that is is now
and then no beginning.
revealed. Right, no beginning, no end. So once we have that, then we're free of all these Egypts. But now the Rebbe is going to talk about another level of leaving Egypt. There's something else, not just going beyond the breaking free of our physical or material Egypts and so those personal exiles that we're in, or even the spiritual Egypt, but there's another level. Now, the fact that we say that leaving Egypt, we will that when Mashiach comes, we will have left all boundaries behind. This is true in regard to everything. That everything that will happen in the world to come will be completely different to what they are now. Once we're talking about the revelation of God's essence, so then everything is different. Both with regard to the world, as the prophet says, then will be a new heaven and a new earth, a new world. So reality, the world will be a different world or a new world. And also with regard to Torah, which the Torah is the blueprint through which the world was created, as it says, God looked into the Torah and from that created the world. That the Torah was like a blueprint to God. So therefore, we see that the Torah is also connected to creation. So even though Torah is higher than creation, even though Torah was the blueprint through which God created the world, and it's higher, nevertheless, it still serves as a source to the world. So we're back to, as we discussed earlier. So we see that even Torah still has a connection to limit and to those boundaries. And so therefore, when Mashiach comes, there will be a new Torah. And again, God forbid to say a new Torah meaning new, different mitzvahs, but Torah on a whole new level. That's not so we're not going to get into it here, what that means. It doesn't Chas v'Shalom mean a different Torah, because Torah is it's not a different Torah, but on a whole new level. So it'll be, we can call it just like the world. It'll be a new world, it'll be a new Torah, meaning fundamentally different than what it is now.
No, it's not new. I don't think it's new. Back to what's supposed to be.
Fine.
Technically, because we made the Timtum. We made the Timtum. Then Hashem made the Timtum. That's why we will be on Timtum.
Fine.
It's not back to new.
Yeah.
It's back to what's supposed to be.
Yeah. Okay. To the ultimate purpose. This is what
it was. Not the ultimate purpose. It's going back to what it's supposed to be. We lost it, and you keep saying that it's going to something new. It's not new. It's not new. It's going back to what it's supposed to be.
If you remember, we were learning before Rosh Hashanah. The Maimon we learned before Rosh Hashanah. If you remember, it's going back a while already. So there we talked about the fact that you have to say that La'asid Lave will have achieved a newer level that never existed before. Even though it says that even though God creates the world perfect, and in a sense He created a redeemed world, a world like a Mashiach world, a Messianic reality. But if the point is just to get back to that, then there's no point. But what's the point? And the Rebbe says, I think the Rebbe in the Maimon, when the Rebbe said it, the Rebbe said, God forbid to say that. Like it was so unthinkable to him to say that the whole point of everything we're going through and everything that we're dealing with is just to get back to the original place. And by the way, so what does it mean? Simply, what does it mean that it's going to be hard? Because ultimately, when God creates the world, He creates a messianic reality. And Mashiach comes, we would have brought that about. So automatically, it's already a deeper level. Whatever, it's a whole other topic. Let's not get sidetracked. Okay. Okay, so that's true with regard to the world, Olam Chadash, right? As the pasuk says, Shemayim Chadash and Eretz Chadasha. Torah, as it says, Torah Chadasha Me'iti Teitzeh. And then Ve'hem B'negei Lam Shachas V'gilei Elokus, as well as to regard to the revelation of godliness that will be in the world. Then Shagilei Elokus Sheyelas Lav Gilei Chadash Shenaila Be'ein Arech Megilei Dachshav. That the revelation of godliness that will be when Mashiach comes is Be'ein Arech higher. It is infinitely higher than the revelation of godliness that we have now. The Kol HaGiluim Da'achshav Hem Mechitzeni Yisatik. So if we want to get technical and mystical here, what is it? So the technicalities of it is that today's revelation of godliness that's available in the world is from the outer level of Atik. When Mashiach comes, that'll be the inner aspect of Atik. What does that mean? One level, a higher level, a lower level. Atik is generally referred to Atik as the Preemies of Kesed, the Preemies of God's will. So within God's will, and as we've discussed at length in the past, the difference between emotion and intellect and will, the will being the highest thing, the closest to the person's core. So within that, you have the outer aspect of one's will and the inner aspect of one's will. So if you remember, actually, in the last mimer when we talked about in Balaylahu, we talked about how God creates the world through His will. And we said that will is an expression of the essence, and it's only within the person himself. It's not in anything else. Thinking, you think things that are outside of yourself. Emotions, you have emotions towards things outside of yourself. But will is, so even so, within will itself, you have two aspects of will. You have the will as it relates to something outside of you. Even within, having said that it's within yourself, still there's the will as it's outside of you. That's chitzonius atik. And then you have the preemies atik as it's completely just about within your essence. So the preemies atik is rooted in God's very essence. It's a perfect place to house, so to speak, God's essence, a perfect vessel for God's essence. So when Mashiach comes, that'll be the revelation of Preemies Atik, meaning, as we're talking about here, as we said before, the Gilei of Atzmos, of God's essence. This is why, when Mashiach comes, we had said that the primary cause of Mashiach coming is mainly our service of God right at the end of the time of exile. Since when Mashiach comes, all these things are going to be new. It's going to be a whole new reality on all these levels. Both the world is going to be new, and Torah is going to be new, and the revelation of godliness that we're going to reveal in the world is going to be new. And not just that they're all going to be new, but it's going to be be'ein arich. It's going to be infinitely, fundamentally, essentially different than it's been till now. So just as we're going to usher in a new era and a new reality, we need to lead up to it with a new type of service. And this will relate also to what we had said earlier in the Maimer, that it's primarily the leaving exile in our time now, at the end of the time of Golus, right before Mashiach, that's going to bring about that reality. And here we see another aspect of it. Since we're talking about a new reality, so we need to usher it in with a new type of service. And we'll identify that and finish the Maimer Mitzvah Shem on Tuesday. Just one thought. What time is it? It's already 9:08. So just one thought about this. The idea we're talking about a new reality. This is one of the things it says about Chassidus. One of the questions when Chassidus first burst onto the scene with the Baal Shem Tov. So one of the questions asked is, where was it till now? If it's so important, so special, where was it till now? So the point is, it's one of the explanations. There are many different explanations, but one of them is that since you could compare all of creation, all of history. You have the 7 millenniums, you have 6 millennium, and then you have the 7 millennium is the millennium of Mashiach. This discusses in Kabbalah. And so you could compare all of history to like a week, a 7-day week. Right now we're in the 6th millennium, right? We're in 5,777. So so we're 777 years into the 6th millennium, which would be Friday. And just as on the halacha is, the din is that on Friday you taste the food that you're going to eat on Shabbos. So Friday you have a taste of it, and Friday is Misha Tarach Be'erev Shabbos Yechol B'Shabbos. There's a closer connection, not just to the whole week, but specifically Friday to a connection between Friday and Shabbos. So the same thing is, historically, if we look at all of creation, all of the trajectory of it, now that we're Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos, so now it's time to start partaking of those foods. So since when Mashiach comes is Torah Chadasha, and what's Torah Chadasha is going to be Pnimius HaTorah, the inner dimension of Torah. So Chassidus is a taste of that Torah. And that's why Limud Chassidus and Hafatz Samayonos Chutzah, when the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov that he went up to visit Mashiach and he asked him, when are you coming? And Mashiach said, when your teachings will spread to the whole world. What's the why? What's the connection? I mean, besides it being very flattering and complimentary, but there's a fundamental connection between the two. Because since Mashiach's coming, that's what will be revealed then. What will we be learning? Pnimius HaTorah, the inner dimension of Torah. So a preparation to that is the spreading of Preemies HaTorah, is the learning of Preemies HaTorah. So similar to what we're saying here, that since when Mashiach comes, we're going to usher in a new reality. So our service today, if you think about all of history, and think about all the greats and the giants and the great sages and everything the Jewish people have gone through throughout our entire history, it's now, right at the end, that we need to serve God in a whole new way. Because we're ushering in that new reality. And that we'll learn about Mitzvah Shem, as we said on Tuesday.
I think one of the hardest time of life is when Mashiach comes.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah. That relates.
Few people are going to be...
A spoiler alert. Chili, you do the honors? Yep.